What if everything you've been told about staying consistent is not just wrong, but actually keeping you trapped in cycles of starting and stopping? In the next few minutes, I'm going to share something that might sound impossible at first, but by the end, you'll understand why your lack of motivation might actually be your greatest gift. Most people believe consistency requires constant motivation, endless willpower, and somehow maintaining enthusiasm for months or years. They think the people who stick to their habits and goals are just naturally more motivated, more disciplined, or fundamentally different from the rest of us. But here's the truth that changes everything. The most consistent people in the world aren't more motivated than you. They're not relying on inspiration to carry them through. They don't wake up every day feeling excited about their habits. They've discovered something much more powerful and reliable than motivation. They understand that consistency isn't about feeling motivated, it's about creating systems that work regardless of how you feel. They've learned to build momentum through structure rather than emotion, through environment rather than willpower, through intelligent design rather than brute force. The people who seem effortlessly consistent have cracked a code that most of us never learn. Motivation is ungullible, but systems are bulletproof. When you learn to create the right conditions, consistency becomes inevitable rather than difficult. This understanding doesn't just transform your ability to stick with habits, it transforms your relationship with yourself, your confidence in your ability to follow through, and your capacity to create lasting change in any area of your life. Stay with me because this changes everything about how you approach goals and growth. Have you ever noticed how the harder you try to stay motivated, the more elusive consistency becomes? There's something happening beneath the surface that most of us miss because we're focused on finding the perfect source of inspiration instead of building systems that don't require inspiration. Picture this familiar scenario. You start a new habit or goal feeling incredibly motivated. You have a clear vision, strong reasons, and genuine excitement about the changes you're going to make. You begin with enthusiasm, making progress for days or even weeks. Then, inevitably, life gets busy, the novelty wears off, or you just don't feel like doing it anymore. You tell yourself you'll get back to it when motivation returns. You look for inspiring videos, read motivational quotes, or try to recreate that initial excitement. Sometimes it works temporarily, but the cycle repeats. You start and stop, until you conclude that you're just not the type of person who can stick to things. Here's the compassionate truth. You're not broken, you're not lacking willpower, you're not fundamentally inconsistent. You've simply been taught to rely on the most unreliable force in human psychology, motivation, to drive the most important force in personal change, consistency. The real issue isn't your inability to stay motivated, it's that you've been told consistency depends on motivation when the opposite is actually true. Motivation is an emotion, and emotions are inherently temporary and unpredictable. Building lasting change on emotion is like building a house on sand. It might work for a while, but it won't survive the storms. Most people treat motivation like a renewable resource that they can tap into whenever they need it. But motivation is actually more like lightning, powerful when it strikes, but impossible to control or predict. The people who achieve long-term consistency have learned to harness this lightning when it appears, but they don't depend on it for their daily progress. The deeper root cause of inconsistency isn't lack of motivation, it's dependence on motivation. When you make your progress conditional on feeling motivated, you're essentially saying that your growth depends on circumstances outside your control. This creates a fragile system that collapses the moment your emotional state shifts. Think about how a river maintains its flow. It doesn't rely on constant rainfall to keep moving toward the ocean. The riverbed, the slope of the land, and the laws of physics create conditions where flow is inevitable regardless of weather. Some days there's more water, some days less, but the fundamental movement continues because the system doesn't depend on external conditions. Your consistency can work the same way. When you create the right structures, environments, and systems, progress becomes inevitable regardless of your emotional state. You don't need to feel motivated to brush your teeth, check your email, or have your morning coffee, because these actions are supported by systems that make them automatic. The beautiful truth is that once you understand this distinction between motivation-dependent and system-dependent consistency, everything changes. You stop waiting for inspiration and start creating conditions. You stop relying on willpower and start designing environments. You stop fighting your human nature and start working with it. Your struggles with consistency weren't a sign that you're not meant to achieve your goals. They were simply information that you were using the wrong fuel for the journey. Motivation is the spark that starts the fire, but systems are the wood that keeps it burning long after the initial excitement fades. Most people are exhausted by noon not because consistency is inherently difficult, but because they're trying to force themselves through actions that require constant emotional energy. When you build systems that work with your psychology rather than against it, consistency becomes effortless because you're not fighting internal resistance every step of the way. The people who seem naturally consistent understand that consistency isn't a personality trait, it's a design challenge. They've learned to create conditions where the right actions happen naturally, regardless of mood, energy level, or external circumstances. And this understanding is available to anyone willing to shift from motivation-dependent to system-dependent approaches. Let me tell you about Maria, a software engineer who struggled with consistency for years. She would start exercise routines with tremendous enthusiasm, only to abandon them within weeks. She'd begin learning new skills with passionate dedication, then gradually lose interest and give up. She tried meditation, journaling, reading, and countless other positive habits, but nothing stuck for more than a month. Maria became convinced she was fundamentally inconsistent. She watched other people maintain routines for years and assumed they had stronger willpower or better genetics. She tried every motivational technique she could find: vision boards, accountability partners, reward systems, inspiring podcasts. Each approach would work temporarily, but inevitably the motivation would fade and the habit would die. Maria became convinced she was fundamentally inconsistent. She watched other people maintain routines for years and assumed they had stronger willpower or better genetics. She tried every motivational technique she could find: vision boards, accountability partners, reward systems, inspiring podcasts. Each approach would work temporarily, but inevitably the motivation would fade and the habit would die. The turning point came during a particularly stressful project at work. Maria needed to deploy code updates every day for 3 months, regardless of how she felt. There was no choice. The system demanded daily action, and failure wasn't an option. She created simple protocols, automated reminders, prepared workspaces, and step-by-step checklists that eliminated decision-making. Something remarkable happened. Despite feeling unmotivated many days, Maria maintained perfect consistency for the entire 3-month period. She realized that when external systems removed the need for internal motivation, consistency became automatic. This insight changed everything about how she approached personal habits. Maria began applying the same principles to her personal life. Instead of relying on motivation to exercise, she created systems that made movement inevitable. She laid out workout clothes the night before, set up her space in advance, and chose activities so simple she couldn't fail. Instead of waiting to feel inspired to meditate, she attached the practice to her morning coffee routine and kept sessions short enough that motivation wasn't required. Within 6 months, Maria had transformed from someone who couldn't stick to anything into someone with rock-solid consistency. The difference wasn't that she became more motivated, she actually felt less pressure because the systems handled the consistency for her. She wasn't fighting herself anymore, she was flowing with carefully designed structures. The breakthrough insight was that consistency isn't about overcoming human nature, it's about designing systems that work with human nature. Maria stopped trying to become a different type of person and started creating conditions that made consistency inevitable for the person she already was. Her story reveals something profound. The people who seem naturally consistent aren't more motivated than the rest of us. They've simply learned to build systems that don't require motivation to function. They've discovered that the secret isn't feeling like doing something every day. It's creating conditions where doing it becomes the path of least resistance. Here's what transforms everything about staying consistent. True consistency doesn't come from motivation. It comes from creating systems that make the right actions inevitable regardless of how you feel. Most people have this completely backwards. They think consistency requires maintaining motivation, but sustainable consistency actually eliminates the need for motivation. The most consistent people aren't more motivated. They've designed their lives so that motivation becomes irrelevant. This reveals something that changes everything. Consistency is not a character trait, it's an engineering problem. When you approach it as a design challenge rather than a willpower challenge, solutions become obvious. Instead of trying to strengthen your motivation muscle, you remove the need for that muscle entirely. Let me share the story of James, a writer who struggled to maintain a daily writing practice for years. He would start each attempt with grand plans and burning enthusiasm, only to miss a day here and there until the habit completely dissolved. He tried writing retreats, inspiring environments, accountability groups, and every productivity system he could find. The transformation came when James stopped trying to stay motivated and started building what he called motivation-proof systems. He identified the smallest possible writing action, opening a document and writing one sentence. He attached this micro-action to his morning coffee routine. He prepared his workspace the night before and eliminated every possible source of friction. Most importantly, James made the commitment so small that motivation wasn't required. Writing one sentence took less emotional energy than deciding whether or not to write. The action became automatic, like brushing his teeth or checking his phone. Some days he wrote only that one sentence. Other days the momentum carried him to write much more. But the system ensured daily consistency regardless of his emotional state. This reveals the deeper principle. Sustainable consistency operates below the threshold of motivation. When actions are small enough, simple enough, and automatic enough, they happen regardless of how you feel. The goal isn't to feel motivated every day, it's to create systems where motivation becomes unnecessary. Consider how your body maintains consistency with breathing. You don't need to feel motivated to breathe, you don't have to remember to breathe, and you don't stop breathing when you're tired or distracted. Breathing happens automatically because it's supported by systems that operate below conscious control. Your habits can work the same way. When you design them properly, they become as automatic as breathing. They happen not because you feel like doing them, but because the environmental cues, the preparation, and the simplicity make them the natural response to the situation. The conventional approach to consistency is like trying to push a boulder uphill every day. It requires enormous effort, the momentum stops the moment you stop pushing, and success depends on maintaining that effort indefinitely. The systems approach is like redirecting a river. You do the work once to create the channel, then the water flows naturally toward the destination. Most people fail at consistency because they're trying to use motivation as fuel for a journey that requires a different type of energy. Motivation is like gasoline. It burns hot and provides quick bursts of power, but it's expensive, runs out quickly, and requires constant refilling. Systems are like solar panels. They require initial setup, but then provide steady, reliable energy that doesn't depend on external sources. When you understand this distinction, everything changes. You stop waiting for inspiration and start creating infrastructure. You stop trying to feel different and start designing differently. You stop fighting your psychology and start working with it. The deeper insight is that motivation and consistency operate on different timescales. Motivation works in moments and days, while consistency works in months and years. Building long-term change on short-term emotion is fundamentally mismatched. But building long-term change on well-designed systems creates alignment between your daily actions and your ultimate outcomes. This doesn't mean motivation is useless. Motivation is incredibly valuable for starting new habits, making big decisions, and pushing through occasional challenging periods. But thinking of motivation as the foundation of consistency is like thinking of lightning as the foundation of electricity. Lightning can power your house for a moment, but you need a different system for reliable, long-term energy that doesn't depend on external sources. When you understand this distinction, everything changes. You stop waiting for inspiration and start creating infrastructure. You stop trying to feel different and start designing differently. You stop fighting your psychology and start working with it. The deeper insight is that motivation and consistency operate on different timescales. Motivation works in moments and days, while consistency works in months and years. Building long-term change on short-term emotion is fundamentally mismatched. But building long-term change on well-designed systems creates alignment between your daily actions and your ultimate outcomes. This doesn't mean motivation is useless. Motivation is incredibly valuable for starting new habits, making big decisions, and pushing through occasional challenging periods. But thinking of motivation as the foundation of consistency is like thinking of lightning as the foundation of electricity. Lightning can power your house for a moment, but you need a different system for reliable, long-term energy. The people who achieve extraordinary consistency understand that their job isn't to stay motivated. It's to build systems so robust that motivation becomes optional. They've learned to create conditions where the right actions happen automatically, where progress continues regardless of mood, and where consistency flows from design rather than determination.
Now let's explore the 4 foundations that create motivation-proof consistency. These aren't techniques to try harder, but principles for designing systems that work automatically. The first foundation is removing every possible barrier between you and the actions you want to take consistently. Most people fail at consistency not because they lack motivation, but because their environment creates unnecessary friction that drains their energy before they even begin. Friction comes in many forms: physical obstacles, decision points, preparation requirements, and mental resistance. Each piece of friction requires energy to overcome, and when you're already feeling unmotivated, even small obstacles can feel insurmountable. Start by identifying every step required to complete your desired action. If you want to exercise consistently, map out everything from getting dressed to finishing your workout. Notice where you encounter resistance, delays, or decision points. These are your friction points. Physical friction includes anything that requires extra effort or time. Having to search for workout clothes, clear space for exercise, or travel to a gym all create friction. Remove these barriers by preparing everything in advance, creating dedicated spaces, or choosing activities that require minimal setup. Decision friction occurs when you have to make choices in the moment. Deciding what to eat, which exercise to do, or how long to meditate all require mental energy. Eliminate these decisions by planning in advance, creating standard protocols, or designing routines that follow the same pattern every time. Emotional friction happens when actions feel overwhelming, complicated, or unpleasant. Reduce this by making commitments so small they feel almost ridiculously easy, focusing on consistency rather than intensity, and choosing approaches that align with your natural preferences. The goal is to make your desired actions easier than your undesired ones. When healthy choices require less effort than unhealthy ones, consistency becomes the path of least resistance. For example, if you want to eat healthier, make unhealthy snacks less accessible by putting them in hard-to-reach places while keeping healthy options visible and ready to eat. If you want to read more, keep books in multiple locations and remove friction from reading while adding friction to less productive activities like excessive phone use. The second foundation is creating environments that naturally promote the behaviors you want to maintain. Your environment is constantly influencing your actions, often below conscious awareness. Instead of fighting against these influences, design them to work in your favor. Environmental cues are incredibly powerful because they bypass motivation entirely. When your environment is set up correctly, the right actions feel natural and automatic, while the wrong actions feel awkward and difficult. Create visual cues that remind you of your desired actions without requiring conscious memory. This might mean leaving workout clothes visible, placing books on your pillow, or putting healthy snacks at eye level in your refrigerator. The key is making the cues obvious and unavoidable. Design your spaces to support specific behaviors. If you want to meditate consistently, create a dedicated space with everything you need already in place. If you want to write regularly, set up a workspace where you can begin immediately without preparation. The environment should invite the behavior rather than requiring you to overcome obstacles. Remove environmental triggers for behaviors you want to avoid. This might mean storing junk food in opaque containers,
putting your phone in another room during focused work time, or rearranging your living space to eliminate cues that trigger unproductive habits. Use social environment to your advantage. Surround yourself with people who naturally engage in the behaviors you want to adopt. Their consistent actions will normalize these behaviors for you, making them feel like the obvious choice rather than something special you have to force yourself to do. Consider the timing and sequencing of environmental cues. Place triggers for desired behaviors at natural transition points in your day, after morning coffee, before checking email, or immediately upon arriving home. These existing routines become the foundation for new habits. The goal is to create environments where consistency feels effortless because the space itself guides you toward the right actions. When your environment is aligned with your goals, you're not fighting against your surroundings, you're being supported by them. The third foundation is making your commitments so small that they don't require motivation to complete. Most people fail at consistency because they commit to actions that are too large, requiring significant energy and enthusiasm to maintain. Micro-commitments operate below the motivation threshold. They're so small that you can complete them even when you're tired, busy, or completely unmotivated. The power comes not from the size of individual actions, but from the accumulation of consistency over time. Start with commitments that take less than 2 minutes to complete. If you want to exercise, commit to putting on workout clothes. If you want to meditate, commit to sitting in your meditation space for 1 minute. If you want to write, commit to opening a document and writing 1 sentence. The goal isn't to accomplish something significant every day, it's to maintain the pattern of showing up. Once you're consistently completing the micro-commitment, you often naturally do more, but the system doesn't depend on that extra effort. Make your micro-commitments so easy that you can't fail. If putting on workout clothes feels like too much some days, commit to simply touching your workout clothes. If writing 1 sentence feels overwhelming, commit to opening the document. The size of the commitment should never be the barrier to consistency. Focus on the minimum viable version of each habit. What's the smallest action that still counts as engaging with your goal? This minimum version becomes your daily non-negotiable, while anything beyond it is bonus. Track your micro-commitments to build momentum and confidence. Seeing a chain of consistent days, even for tiny actions, creates psychological momentum that naturally pulls you toward continuation. The satisfaction of maintaining consistency becomes its own motivation. Remember that micro-commitments aren't about staying small forever, they're about building the foundation of consistency. Once the pattern is firmly established, you can gradually expand the commitment, but only after the smaller version feels completely automatic. The key insight is that consistency is more valuable than intensity. Doing something small every day for a year creates more lasting change than doing something big sporadically. Micro-commitments ensure that you prioritize the consistency that creates transformation over the intensity that creates burnout. The fourth foundation is creating automatic triggers that initiate your desired behaviors without requiring conscious decision-making. Triggers remove the need to remember, decide, or motivate yourself. The action happens as a natural response to specific cues. The most powerful triggers are existing habits or routines that you already perform consistently. By attaching new behaviors to established patterns, you leverage existing consistency rather than trying to create it from scratch. Identify daily actions you already do without thinking: making coffee, checking your phone, sitting down at your desk, or getting into your car. These automatic behaviors become the foundation for new habits because they already happen regardless of motivation. Create clear if-then connections between triggers and desired actions. After I pour my morning coffee, I will write in my journal for 2 minutes. When I sit down at my desk, I will review my daily priorities. Before I check my phone in the evening, I will do 5 minutes of stretching. The specificity removes ambiguity and makes the connection automatic. Use environmental triggers that don't depend on memory or decision-making. Set up your space so that encountering certain objects or locations automatically cues the desired behavior. Seeing your workout clothes could trigger putting them on, entering your kitchen could trigger drinking water, or opening your laptop could trigger reviewing your daily goals. Design temporal triggers around natural transition points in your day. These moments, waking up, finishing meals, arriving home, or preparing for bed, are natural opportunities to insert new behaviors because your brain is already shifting between activities. Stack multiple small behaviors onto single triggers to create routine chains. Once you have one solid trigger behavior connection, you can add additional actions to create longer sequences that flow naturally together. The key is building these chains gradually rather than trying to create complex routines immediately. Test and refine your triggers based on what actually works in your real life. Some cues that seem logical in theory don't work in practice, while others that seem random become incredibly powerful. Pay attention to which triggers naturally lead to action and which require too much effort to maintain. The goal is to create a web of automatic triggers that make your desired behaviors feel inevitable. When the right cues consistently lead to the right actions, consistency becomes a natural feature of your daily flow, rather than something you have to force. When you build your consistency on these four foundations, friction elimination, environmental design, micro-commitments, and system triggers, something remarkable happens. What used to require enormous willpower becomes effortless. What used to depend on feeling motivated becomes automatic. What used to feel like swimming upstream becomes flowing with the current. You stop being someone who struggles with consistency and become someone who naturally maintains productive patterns. This isn't about becoming perfect, it's about creating systems that work with your human psychology rather than against it. Now let's translate these foundations into a practical approach you can begin implementing immediately. Remember, the goal isn't to build perfect systems overnight, but to gradually create infrastructure that makes consistency inevitable.
Start by observing your current patterns without trying to change anything. Most people try to build consistency systems without understanding how their existing routines and environments either support or sabotage their efforts. For 1 week, track when you naturally feel energetic versus depleted, which environments make positive behaviors feel easier, and what circumstances typically lead to breaking good habits. Notice the friction points, environmental triggers, and existing routines that could become the foundation for new systems. Pay attention to your consistency patterns across different types of activities. You might discover that you're already highly consistent in some areas. Perhaps you never miss brushing your teeth, always check your email, or consistently watch certain shows. These existing patterns reveal that you already understand consistency. You just need to apply those same principles to new areas. Identify the specific moments when motivation typically fails you. Is it when you're tired, stressed, busy, or distracted? These failure points become the design requirements for your motivation-proof systems. You need approaches that work especially well during these challenging moments. Notice which current habits happen automatically without conscious effort. These automatic behaviors become potential triggers for new habits because they already occur regardless of motivation or external circumstances. In the second week, identify and begin removing friction from one desired behavior. Choose something you want to do consistently but currently struggle with. Then map out every step required to complete that action. For each step, ask, what makes this harder than it needs to be? And how could I eliminate this barrier? Look for physical obstacles, decision points, preparation requirements, and emotional resistance. Most people are surprised by how much unnecessary friction exists in their daily routines. Begin systematically removing these friction points. Prepare materials in advance, create dedicated spaces, eliminate decision points, and simplify processes. The goal is to make the desired action easier than the undesired alternatives. For example, if you want to exercise consistently, remove friction by laying out workout clothes the night before, choosing simple bodyweight exercises that don't require equipment, and selecting activities you genuinely enjoy rather than ones you think you should do.
Test your friction reduction efforts and refine them based on real-world experience. Some changes that seem helpful in theory don't work in practice, while others have unexpectedly powerful effects. Pay attention to which modifications actually make consistency easier. In the third week, focus on designing one environment to naturally support your desired behavior. Choose a space you use regularly and modify it to make good choices obvious and easy while making poor choices less convenient. Create visual cues that remind you of desired actions without requiring conscious memory. Place objects associated with positive habits in prominent locations where you'll encounter them naturally. Make these cues impossible to ignore but pleasant to see. Remove or relocate cues that trigger undesired behaviors. This might mean storing distracting objects out of sight, rearranging furniture to eliminate problematic patterns, or creating physical barriers that add friction to negative habits. Design the space to support specific activities. If you want to read more, create a comfortable reading corner with good lighting and eliminate distractions. If you want to cook healthier meals, organize your kitchen to make healthy ingredients more accessible than processed options. Consider the flow of movement through your space. Arrange things so that you naturally encounter cues for positive behaviors while moving through your normal routines. The environment should guide you toward good choices rather than requiring conscious effort to make them. In the fourth week, establish micro-commitments that are so small they don't require motivation to complete. Start with one behavior you want to maintain consistently and identify the absolute minimum version that still counts as engagement. Make the commitment smaller than you think necessary. If you want to meditate daily, start with 1 minute. If you want to exercise regularly, start with putting on workout clothes. If you want to write consistently, start with opening a document. The goal is to ensure that motivation is never the limiting factor. Attach your micro-commitment to an existing routine that you already do consistently. This leverages established patterns rather than trying to create new ones from scratch. The existing habit becomes the trigger for the new behavior. Track your completion of these micro-commitments to build momentum and confidence. Use a simple system: check marks on a calendar, marks in a journal, or a basic app. The act of recording success reinforces the positive pattern and makes consistency visible. Focus entirely on consistency rather than results. Your only job is to complete the micro-commitment every day, regardless of whether you do anything beyond it. Some days you'll naturally do more, but the system doesn't depend on that extra effort. After the initial 4 weeks, continue refining and expanding your consistency systems based on what you learn about your patterns and preferences. Gradually increase the size of your commitments only after the smaller versions feel completely automatic. This usually takes 2 to 4 weeks for simple habits. Don't rush this process. Solid foundations create lasting change. Add new behaviors one at a time, building each one to automatic consistency before introducing the next. Most people try to change too many things simultaneously, which overwhelms their capacity for system design and maintenance. Regularly assess your systems for friction points that develop over time. What starts as a smooth process can accumulate obstacles as circumstances change. Periodic maintenance keeps your systems running efficiently. Adapt your approaches based on seasonal changes, life transitions, and evolving preferences. Effective consistency systems are flexible enough to accommodate change while maintaining their core functionality. Create backup systems for challenging periods. Have simplified versions of your routines for busy days, travel, illness, or high-stress periods. These backup systems ensure that consistency continues even when normal approaches aren't possible. Remember that the goal isn't perfect execution but sustainable progress. Some days will go better than others, and that's completely normal. The power comes from having systems that naturally guide you back to positive patterns rather than requiring constant vigilance to maintain them. The most important insight is that building these systems is itself a skill that improves with practice. Each successful system you create makes it easier to design the next one. Over time, you develop an intuitive understanding of how to create conditions that make consistency inevitable rather than difficult. Your relationship with consistency transforms from something that requires constant effort to something that happens naturally as a result of intelligent design. You stop being someone who struggles with follow-through and become someone who creates reliable systems for any goal you want to achieve. The journey from motivation-dependent to system-dependent consistency isn't about becoming a different person, it's about designing conditions that work with the person you already are. You don't need to develop superhuman willpower or maintain constant enthusiasm. You need to create infrastructure that makes the right actions inevitable. Your struggles with consistency weren't evidence of personal weakness or character flaws. They were simply information that you were using motivation as fuel for a journey that requires a different type of energy. Once you understand that consistency comes from systems rather than feelings, everything becomes possible. The transformation that awaits you isn't just about achieving specific goals, it's about discovering your capacity to create reliable change in any area of your life. When you learn to build motivation-proof systems, you develop a superpower that applies to health, relationships, career, creativity, and personal growth. Remember that this process is about progress, not perfection. There will be days when even the best systems don't work perfectly, and that's completely normal. The key is having infrastructure that naturally guides you back to positive patterns rather than requiring heroic effort to maintain them. The people who seem effortlessly consistent aren't more motivated than you. They've simply learned to create conditions where consistency becomes the path of least resistance. They've discovered that the secret isn't feeling like doing something every day, but making that something happen regardless of how they feel. As you begin building these systems, trust the process of gradual emergence. Small changes in design create large changes in outcomes over time. Your brain learns through repetition, and these consistent small actions build neural pathways that make positive behaviors feel increasingly natural and automatic. The most beautiful part of this understanding is that it removes the pressure to stay motivated. Instead of fighting against the natural ebb and flow of human emotion, you work with it. Instead of criticizing yourself for lacking enthusiasm, you focus on creating better systems. Instead of waiting for inspiration, you build infrastructure that generates momentum. This is your invitation to stop depending on motivation and start designing consistency, to stop fighting against your human nature and start working with it, to stop forcing outcomes and start creating conditions where the right outcomes become inevitable. Your most consistent future self isn't someone with perfect motivation, it's someone with perfectly designed systems. Someone who has learned to create conditions where positive actions happen automatically, where progress continues regardless of mood, and where consistency flows from intelligent design rather than constant determination. The motivation will come and go, but the systems will remain, and in those systems lies your freedom from the exhausting cycle of starting and stopping, your pathway to lasting change, and your discovery of what becomes possible when consistency is no longer dependent on how you feel. Your systems are waiting to be built, not the systems you think you should want, but the systems that work for who you actually are. This is how you stay consistent without motivation, not through strength, but through design.